Welcome to the HEAL Report. I am your host, Angela Smith, National Coordinator and co-founder of HEAL, and today we are interviewing a survivor of Island View RTC and San Marcos RTC. And do you wish for this interview to be anonymous and for HEAL to protect your identity?
Yes.
Okay. What programs were you in?
So I went to San Marcos for 6 months in 2006, and then I went to Island View in Utah in 2008 to 2010.
Okay, and please specify which programs you're referring to when discussing specific events.
Okay.
Okay, and were you addressed by name, given a new name, or assigned and addressed by a code or number while enrolled?
Not at San Marcos, but at Island View, they really just like to call us by our last name sometimes, so that's about it.
Okay. When were you enrolled, and when did you leave the program? So you already said a little bit about that.
Yeah, so San Marcos, I was enrolled when I was 12. My stepmom was really abusive, essentially, and I was reacting accordingly to abuse by yelling and by defending myself, and I ended up getting sent there. And it was definitely not a place I should have been, but I had, like, my 13th birthday there, and I only spent 6 months. Island View, I was there mainly because I was suicidal a lot of the time, and I was self-harming, and my dad got concerned, so he sent me there. So I was there when I was 15, and I graduated, quote-unquote, when I was 16.
Okay. Was there a level system of, quote-unquote, privileges and consequences? And please describe in as much detail as you can recall the level system at each program.
So San Marcos, again, I was 12, so I don't remember a lot, but I remember that there were definitely colors. On the lower levels, you didn't have a lot of privileges. I can't exactly remember which ones, but I remember on the higher levels you definitely got to go to off-campus outings, you got to order food, you had movie nights, and on the lower levels, from what I remember, you had, you know, a much earlier bedtime and limited phone call time and stuff like that. Island View was probably the more extreme of the two with the level system. So you came in and you were on orientation for 2 weeks, and orientation had when you were first there and on orientation, you had the same privileges as an explorer. If you were demoted down all the way to orientation for you know, quote-unquote, misbehaving or breaking the rules or whatever, you would have no privileges on orientation. So on Explorer, you were allowed to do board games and cards, play a musical instrument. What else? I think you had 10 minutes of phone call time. And I can't remember what else, but I feel like there is something else. There is the Island View handbook online, though, so you could just look at it. Apply was the next one, and you got to go on off-campus activities. You got to listen to Walkman because that's what they were into back then. Well, there was iPods, but they were afraid of us listening to them for whatever reason. What else? You got 15 minutes of phone call time, and you got to play the Nintendo 64 or PS2, depending on what the unit had. Impact, which was the next one, you got to, you had an extra phone call a week. You got to talk to the same sex on the other team. So I was on Silver, so I couldn't talk to the girls on Gold team until I reached Impact. There was an Impact breakfast, but that didn't happen too often. It was just basically an extra outing with some of the staff, and they typically had the staff that you know, would punish the kids more, would be really hard on the kids that would, you know, quote unquote misbehave. So a lot of them were just dicks. And you got to go outside with without staff, two other people, because you couldn't go there on your own, and you couldn't go out there with another person because of run risk or whatever. Test, which was the final level, which is when most people would graduate. You got to talk to the boys or the girls, depending on what sex you are. Unlimited phone call time, test privilege, which a lot of people used, honestly, to either skip PE, which they would basically make us run a whole bunch of laps. And a lot of people, like, to this day have, like, knee issues from it. Or to skip groups, which I definitely did, and a lot of the groups there were abusive, so it made a lot of sense that people did that. I can't really remember what else, but typically with tests you were given a lot of privileges and you got to get away with a lot of stuff, but you were also expected to basically bully people. And at Island View especially, even though they gave us privileges and they seemed really cool, like especially with the off-campus trips, there was always a, you know, there was, I can't quite find the word, but there was always something about it that, you know, if you just did something wrong, it could easily be taken away, and often it was with a lot of people. And whenever people got privileges taken away at, you know, the good night group that we would have, or wrap-up group or whatever, I can't really remember the name, if you got privileges taken away during the day, you would have to read out the slips. And staff would give you slips and would have the upper levels to, like, take away your privileges, which was super embarrassing and super cruel to people. And during the wrap-up group, you would have to read out, you know, what exactly you did and what privileges you got taken away. Because if somebody saw you use that privilege, you would get in even more trouble and people would be able to tell on you. So that was the biggest thing with Island View, where they definitely used the level system as a way to abuse people and to get other people to abuse people by, you know, typically the only way you can move up was being junior staff and holding your peers accountable and whatever. So, yeah, I've been rambling a little bit, but yeah, that's what I remember about the level system.
That's okay. So about the groups, now you had said when we spoke before that there was confrontational and you're encouraged to basically, I mean, you just said this a little bit, abuse other people in these groups, that's why it was uncomfortable. You had talked about one situation, I think, with a girl where she had been kind of shunned or isolated.
Yeah, so the biggest, I mean, a lot of the groups there were really abusive, but the biggest one was PSG, Problem Solving Group, and toward the end of my stay, they changed the acronym to PIG, and I don't know why, and I don't know what it means because they didn't define it when I was there. They just changed it for whatever reason. So with that group in particular, that is especially when they would make you hold your peers accountable, quote unquote. I hate that word. But that is the word that they used against us. So throughout the week would say, you know, particularly with this incident, there was this girl who is on a communication restriction, which meant that you can't talk to anyone. And at the same time, they had taken away all her clothes, all her personal effects, including her pictures, including any books, just basically, you know, dehumanized her and took away anything that could have been a source of identity. So when I first got there, she was on CMR, but during this period, which is, you know, coming to the PSG, she was off CMR for whatever reason. She was looking at herself in the mirror. You know, I'm gay or whatever. I came out later as trans, which is, you know, another part of how I was treated there. But, yeah, so she was calling herself fat, and at the time, you know, fat's not a bad word, but I was like, you know, no, you're not fat, you're really pretty. And because of the PSG slips, we had an issue with somebody. We would drop slips on that person, and we would put our name, their name, and what the issue was, and we would put them in the box. and every Friday they would get together with everyone on the team, including all the staff that were working that day, so like 3 to 4 staff, like milieu staff was what they called them, and then all the therapists assigned to that team. And we would all get together, and it was super cult-like, because when we would get to this group, we would all open up our handbooks, and we would all read out the rules of the group. And in this group, we were forced to use I feel statements when we were expressing our grievances with this other person. And I'll say that I feel statements, it really bothers me. I feel blank when you blank because blank. And, they use that a lot in DBT or whatever, but they made it really manipulative and really screwed up, because after that, pretty much everyone would agree with that person, dropping the grievance on you, and then gain up on you. So going back to the girl that, I said that, you're not fat, she dropped a slip on me for flirting with her, and so did my roommate at the time, my other roommate, who was my compass, which was the person that, introduced you to the rules there, blah, blah, blah. And at the same time, I got 13 slips dropped on me. And it essentially was attack therapy, because, they went slip after slip after slip, and it made it to where, to this day, I have a really, really hard time, one, dealing with criticism without getting emotional, and dealing with people coming at me in an aggressive manner. Either I get aggressive or I just get very, very emotionally upset. So that's the biggest group, but they had another group, PTG, I can't remember what it was, but basically the milieu staff there, who were completely untrained, by the way, in anything therapeutic. Most of them, just had high school diplomas, were doing group therapy. So not only is that unethical, but that definitely did not help people. So those are the two biggest groups that I remember.
Okay. Were you forced to provide labor, and was your labor compensated? If so, what kind of labor were you forced to perform, and what labor violations did you witness while employed or while enrolled?
Employed. So we were, it doesn't sound bad, but they would make us clean the entire unit, which included, messing around with chemicals, and we didn't have gloves. A lot of people could have gotten very, very sick, and we weren't compensated for that at all. And, a lot of people will be like, oh, well, they're teaching you how to do chores, blah, blah, blah. But, again, we had jobs there, and one of the jobs was called Sherlock, and Sherlock would make sure that everyone was in dress code, but also make sure all the cleaning was done. So we were all assigned with certain cleaning chores and whatever. So during the day group, I can't even remember the name, but we would talk about, the goals for the day and play a game or whatever the hell, while Sherlock was doing the run and checking all the cleaning. Well, if the cleaning wasn't done right, you would get a mark, and the marks would impact your privileges but also impact your levels. So if you're on test, you only got 6 marks. If you got 7 marks for whatever reason, you'd be dropped the level. And, talking about Sherlock and stuff, yeah, we had, roles and stuff. Sherlock, Trail Boss, which would keep track of everyone. He would tell staff where everyone went and would make sure everyone's on time to stuff. Team Leader, which definitely in other programs it's called junior staff, but when I was team leader, we were expected to basically be, making sure the unit's not going to shit, basically, but also if anything went wrong, you were at fault for it. So you were forced to tell on people, you were forced to take privileges away from people. In confrontational groups, you were expected to drop a lot of slips on people, and you were expected to, basically be a huge dick about it too, and be really cruel to people because that was what was deemed as acceptable. Like people took out trash and stuff like that. The only, compensation we got was, privileges. But even then, not really.
Right. So you were encouraged to basically spy and tattle on your fellows. And you kind of mentioned this before, but you weren't flirting with the other girl when you were just trying to help her with her self-esteem issues, right? And so she called. But that's kind of encouraged to, almost make a false complaint about someone or exaggerate what was going on to get points.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what happened, too, because around that time, staff were getting super pissed because we weren't dropping slips on people. So they basically encouraged for us to find issues. And a lot of people did because, when they would yell at us and stuff and punish people, it was really scary, especially, when you're first new there, which is when the 13 slips happened on me. It's extremely stressful and sets people off in panic attacks. And, I still, my panic attacks didn't start until I went due. And with team leader especially, I see it as, you're basically an abuser as well, along with the staff. And it's extremely screwed up that they made people do that. And they made me do that. And, I was punished a lot when I wasn't doing what they expected me to do. We went on a camping trip one time, and I was extremely stressed out because we had just gone through a situation where girls had to run, tried to run and whatever. And I basically got yelled at for it, and I was blamed for it, but I was allowed to go on the camping trip, and my therapist at the time was like, you know what, you take a break, this is a camping trip, this is meant to, to relax you and whatever, so I took a break. I let other people take initiative. I stood on the sidelines, and I just made sure nothing, awful happened, nobody ran off on a camping trip in Wyoming, because that would be awful, especially out in the woods. But when I got back, I got my level taken away from me because I wasn't enough of a leader on the camping trip. So they expected me and other people that were TLs to abuse people. So yeah.
Were you denied contact with your family or visits with your family during your enrollment?
Yeah, your first 2 weeks there, you couldn't talk to your parents on the phone. You could write letters, but you had to give all the letters to staff, and, they did read them, and I know with some people they held letters back. They didn't send their letters out. I don't know why, but I can assume it was because they disagreed with what the person was writing, or I know one person, she got all her letters from her girlfriend withheld from her, and she didn't know this until she was writing her and her girlfriend was writing her back. She didn't know this until when she graduated because her therapist was like, see, you're doing so much better without her. Now you can go marry a nice man, blah, blah, blah. They would take away your extra phone time. So, I explained with, Impact and Test, you got extra phone time and you got extra phone calls and whatever. Well, they can take those away, but also they would take away, your phone calls in general if they thought it was detrimental for your treatment. If they thought that you were using the phone calls as a distraction from your treatment, I mentioned the letters and I mentioned the phone calls with the visits. The visits were a privilege, and they could take away that privilege for you to see your family at any time. I wasn't able to see my family for other reasons, but there were situations where people's families would actually be there, and they would make that person go to their family and explain to them why they can't go on leave of absence with them.
Right, and so that would be a problem for the parents, too. It might actually deter future visits if the parents think they're just going to be canceled anyway. Why would they make the trip and arrange for travel and all of that stuff if they're going to arrive just to be sent back home?
Right, and whoever sent you there had full-on control over who you can call. So, and even then, we weren't allowed to touch the numbers on the phone. That was the staff's situation. That's what they were allowed to do. There would be the person, the fellow prisoner that was assigned Mabel or Pavel, depending on the unit you were on, and they were, the official job title was that you would set up the phone schedule, but the unofficial duty that you had was to listen in on your peers' phone calls, and all you would do is just sit there in the chair, and it was a small room, and they had all these phones out in the hall and whatever, and that person would be listening, and if there was anything, that was seen as manipulative, or you were lying, or, if they thought you were getting aggressive with people, they could tell staff to cut the call. And then they would use that against you later.
Right. What type of education did you receive, and did you have any difficulties with credits transferring or being accepted by other schools or educational programs?
I didn't have any issues with my credits being transferred, thankfully, but I didn't graduate Island View, so I've heard of some people that they had issues getting their transcripts from Island View if they graduated from there, and I've heard of people having issues with their credits transferring, but that wasn't my case, which I think is really messed up because they make people stay there for a long, long time sometimes, and would make it to where that person would have to graduate there. You're forced to be there, and then later on in life you find out that you can't go to college and you have to go get your GED. Thankfully, that wasn't my situation with the quality of education. I'm really bad at math, and Island View made it way worse because with math class in particular, I think I took geometry like 3 times, honestly. And I hate geometry. I don't understand it. I was expected to just read the textbook and take the test, and then John Mel, who was the teacher at the time, he would grade it, and then I would just move on the chapter, and that's how we learned. I took the same English class 3 times, so I read Hamlet a total of 4 times, because when I went to my next school, I ended up reading Hamlet again for senior English, which is great. With science class, Shad, I can't remember his last name, but his sister Shannon was teaching Spanish. He was not qualified at all to be teaching chemistry or botany or bio, and he would honestly waste a lot of class time where we would just watch The Office, or he'd go off on a tangent of some sort. Donna, who I can't remember if I think she was a math teacher, but she was also my physics teacher. I didn't learn anything in that class, and when I graduated Island View, I hate calling it graduation, discharged from Island View, essentially released, I had to take my physics final at my public high school, and I completely failed because I didn't learn anything. And the only class there that was probably, useful because it was stress relieving was the art class, and that's about it. And the history teacher, Chad, was a huge dick, too, so. And he just bullied people during class.
Were there any physical interventions or restraints used?
Yeah, so this comes to, this story I'm about to say, this is the situation that messed me up the most at Island View. So this was on my 6-month mark, and I was still stuck at Apply, and I really wanted to be out in 8 months, but they kept me at Apply, and I don't know why. I think a lot of it was to just mess with me. So I kind of just had a mental breakdown. We were lining up to go to the computer lab, which, we were allowed to go on the internet, but it was all, monitored and stuff, and people would get in trouble for looking at unapproved websites, whatever. So I broke from line, and I went in my room, and I just started crying, and Ryan Mortensen and Ashley Rose and Laura, not Laura Burp, but I can't remember her last name. Other people might. They all came in there and they asked me what's wrong, and I told them, I'm suicidal. I'm not doing too well today. I'm really scared. And instead of, being decent people, essentially, Ryan Mortensen decided to put me on CMR, which is communication restriction. So not only was I suicidal, but now I wasn't allowed to talk to anyone, including staff, about it. So I freaked out, honestly, and I kicked Ryan Mortensen in the balls. And he deserves it. Generally in most cases it's not okay to kick people in the balls, but he's somebody who definitely was out of line in a lot of cases. And so, I got physically restrained to the ground and had 3 people at first and then 5 people. And, I wasn't I wasn't a heavy kid at all, and I was kind of small, so it wasn't at that point in time. So, I had, 5 full-grown adults on top of me, and then, I was not only, on CMR, I was on suicide watch, and I couldn't leave the unit at all. So I was stuck on the unit for 2 weeks, and, the first incident happened on a Sunday, and then Tuesday I was just like, I'm sick and tired of sitting on this couch and them only giving me peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to eat, and cold cereal and warm milk. Not cold cereal. Wow. Cereal is cold. Just warm milk and, nasty cereal, just really gross. And just being treated as an invisible person. So I just, I got up from the couch and I went to my room. So apparently that warranted for them to call 6 staff there. And I got slammed down on the ground, and I have scars still on my elbows from trying to, drag myself away from them and just getting yanked back. And I had Eric Flores on top of me, and he's a pretty big dude, and he still works there. He's like 6'4", 300-something pounds, and I had other people on me too, and I said, I can't breathe, and I really couldn't breathe because I had 6 full-grown adults on me, and, Eric Flores was like, no, if you could talk, you can breathe.
Right, and we've heard that, in recent reports regarding restraints with law enforcement with Eric Garner and others, where he said he couldn't breathe, and they said if you can talk, you can breathe, but he ended up dying.
Right,
so.
And, I have asthma, too, and it was undiagnosed at that time, and, I could have died with that situation, and, they eventually let me off the ground, but they threw me in the timeout room, or, essentially the isolation room, which was a completely white room with tile floors, no mat, brick wall. The door can lock. They got in a lot of trouble for locking people in there. So at first when they threw me in there, they were just standing at the door, but I was just pissed at this point and angry and just, full of rage at this situation. I was sent away, and, here I am stuck in bumfuck Utah, dealing with people, putting me on, forbidding me from talking to people just for expressing, I'm not doing well, I need help. So, I broke past them a couple times, and then they locked me in there, which are, that's illegal. You're not allowed to lock people in those rooms, and other people that were there before me have talked about, they did lock people in there before.
Right, so that was like isolation or solitary confinement.
Right, yeah, and, they can legally on paper they can keep you there for 4 hours, but they would use the excuse of, people crying and whatever, for being out of control, so they'd keep them in there longer. I wasn't the only one that, it was called PI4 there, so I might mention this a couple times. I wasn't the only one that was PI4 there either. Like, there's this new girl that was sent there, I think like a month before I left or whatever. Just kind of strange, but I don't think she should have been there. I have no clue what her deal was, but I think it may have been the high doses of medication she was on. I'm not sure, because whenever she was awake, she was really spacey, and she always ended up sleeping. And Mo, who works there still, he actually grabbed her by the ankle, and she was on the top bunk and yanked her off. And because she was freaking out because, she got dragged out of bed by her ankle from the top bunk, they threw her in the timeout room. And, the timeout room in the main building, the building that was connected to the cafeteria, there's only one in there. I think there was one or two, I'm not quite sure, but the one that was right by the nurse's station, the entire room was, it had a huge echo, so you would just hear people screaming and yelling and crying and begging to be let out, and you have to listen to your peers, likely somebody do this, and this happened to people, and staff just said whenever it happened, just look away, just ignore it, blah, blah, blah.
Right, so it's almost, with all of the different things going on, it was training you to only worry about yourself, roll over on anyone else, make up stuff if you have to, do whatever you need to do for you to get ahead, and ignore the suffering of others, and don't have any compassion or show any humanity towards your fellows if they're in distress.
Basically, like, we were expected to be, stone cold to people, especially when, they were in trouble. When I was TL, I was expected to be a stone cold bitch to people and to show no mercy. They got on to people for seeming too close to their peers because they would use it as an excuse to say, you're not focusing on your treatment, you're focusing too much on a friendship or whatever. You basically were forced not to have friends. And a lot of people that I talk to and, either have issues making friends, have issues making friends, have issues keeping friends, or, just have issues with personal relationships in general. For, if you have an issue with somebody, I have the tendency sometimes to lash out and say in a really cruel way, and that was because of how Island View expected us to do it.
Right.
And, I mentioned to a girl, I think like 2-3 years ago that, we had just gotten connected. I said sorry for something that I did a little bit while ago to her, and, we ended up talking about Island View, and I admitted, I think Island View really messed me up. And so, yeah, and she just started flipping out on me when I said that, and said that because I was talking badly about Island View, I was, saying that her experience there was crap, and that I was only, I was horrible there, and I broke the rules, so I deserved to get punished all the time for that. And I've been neglecting to talk about San Marcos, but San Marcos essentially was the same thing as Island View with education, but way more bookwork, and physical restraints were used way more there as well. I got physically restrained with, I walked out of the cafeteria. Sorry to, backtrack, but I just realized that I hadn't been talking about that place much. I walked out of the cafeteria, and suddenly a van drove up, and 3 really big dudes came out, and I was 12, and I got my arms yanked behind my back, a dude's knee in the small of my back, and I was thrown in the van and kept in they drove to this building that had a whole bunch of other kids in there screaming and yelling, and there was no doors on that there in that building either, in the timeout rooms or isolation rooms, but it smelled like piss for sure. So sorry, I just had to backtrack.
That's okay. So in the isolation rooms, they didn't have a bathroom, or they didn't have any way to You had described the isolation rooms, I think, last time we spoke about Island View. I'm not sure if it was San Marcos or Island View, but you had said that you had described the rooms a little bit, like they didn't have any furniture, they didn't have any bathrooms or anything like that. And you were just saying it was San Marcos. I'm just curious, you know.
So, with Island View, if you were in the timeout room, I mean, this didn't happen to me because I wasn't in there for too long. I didn't have to pee, but they definitely could smell like peeing. There was definitely people that did pee in there. Emily Graber, who contributed to a Huffington Post article, talked a little bit about her experience in the timeout room. With San Marcos, a lot of people there had developmental and intellectual disabilities. And a lot of people, did not have control over their bladder. So those rooms smelled like piss, and I did not see a bathroom at all in there. And I know that with Island View and with San Marcos, when you're in the timeout rooms, they didn't let you out if you had to go to the bathroom. They didn't let you out at all.
Right.
We were, at Island View, we were expected to scrub out. If we weren't allowed to go on the off-campus trip on Saturdays, we were expected to go clean the entire unit and scrub it, sealing the floor. But during that day, we would clean out the timeout rooms, and there's nothing more chilly than being in a room with a very, very heavy door that, it was like a prison door, too. On the movies where they show somebody being thrown in an isolation room, and it's like that click, and it's extremely heavy metal.
Yeah.
And they have a little window. That's what the timeout door was. So, staff would have to unlock it and hold it open for you. And, there's nothing terrifying than, having a staff that could just lock you in there, and you have chemicals, and there's chemical fumes. At San Marcos, there wasn't doors in the timeout rooms, but there was an incident where one of the girls was able to sneak silverware from the cafeteria, and I don't know why they had silverware there. That's a really stupid idea. This girl went in the timeout room and slit her wrist, and I ended up finding her. Not only were they used, staff throwing you in there, but people did try to kill themselves in the one in San Marcos.
Right. Do you want to say anything about deceptive marketing? Do you feel like these programs were deceptively marketed or misleading regarding what they offer?
So when I was sent to San Marcos, actually at both situations, I was in the hospital. So the hospital recommended both programs. So I remember with San Marcos, they mentioned that you can go swimming and stuff, which you could go swimming, but they did market individual therapy and group therapy. I didn't see a therapist the entire time I was there. I saw the psychiatrist probably 3 times, and we didn't have any group therapy at all. With Island View, I mentioned that, we had group therapy with the screwed up PSG. We had individual therapists and blah, 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 but they definitely marketed their therapists as top quality, and some of the people that they had were definitely not well trained at all, or had not had educated, updated training or whatever. At both places, they talked about having top quality education, when in reality it was, mostly textbook reading. Island View, they did the camping trips and the rock climbing and whatever, but they definitely marketed their place as, it's just a school, you're with some therapy on the side, and you'll have interactions with the opposite sex, and it's a cheery community where we're all positive, we all support each other, which was all false, which proven by what I've said.
Right.
Yeah, they. I don't know. Like a lot of people will bring up, well, you know, you went on camping trips and you did rock climbing and blah blah blah. But like, you know, that doesn't mean anything. If anything, it kind of screws you up even more because it's hard to determine if you are actually abused or not because you remember the nice things.
Right. And that seems to be what happens at a lot of the programs. You know, the lower levels, you're really beaten and abused and attacked, and then it seems, you know, that's their mode to make it better as you progress, so that once you leave, you're maybe so happy to be out of there and not thinking about what it was like in the first few months that you don't even, you know, you just want to forget about it, and that's why people don't report it to the proper authorities. And then, of course, you know, the monitored communication, you probably weren't permitted to contact law enforcement or Child Protective Services or anything like that, or even medical if there was a medical emergency.
Yeah, like, speaking about that, too, I was young, but I had some, like, you know when you get a gut feeling and when something's just not right?
Yeah.
I got that with, like, a lot of different situations there, but, like, over time I kind of just, like, put it away because I was brainwashed. I was conditioned into thinking this was right, but I remember asking staff a couple of times, you know, like, what if, you know, there's an incident where my life is, you know, where I'm unsafe, like let's say somebody's like freaking out in the unit and, you know, going around and hurting people, can I call the cops? No. What if, you know, I'm injured or somebody else is injured? No, we'll do it for you. There was a situation where a girl definitely should have been able to go to the hospital because she did something in her room, and I think she was dancing or whatever, and she fell on her leg all messed up, and she ended up breaking her foot and her leg, and they didn't take her to the hospital at all, and, you know, she was screaming and crying and, you know, definitely should have called somebody then, but it didn't happen. We weren't allowed to touch the phone. It's like we couldn't do anything about it, and, you know, the worst thing is that because they condition you, you don't realize it's messed up until years later, because, you know, they drilled in your head that we're saving your life, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, and for some people maybe, but for a lot of people, I just see it as prolonging suffering.
Right.
And, you know, we couldn't do anything about it. So even if we realize that this place was messed up, for a lot of us, statute of limitations is done. Like, you know, I think in Utah it's like 7 years or something. I don't even know. But, you know, a lot of the people that I know, we can't do anything about it. We've been out for 7, 8, 9 years.
Right. Well, still, I would recommend to everyone, even if they've been out for a while, file complaints, because even if it's past the statute of limitations, those complaints do go on record, and they can help validate any actionable complaints that come in before the statute is up, like Emily Graber's, like you were mentioning her, like any complaints like that to, you know, help validate that that is what goes on there. So does, you know, doing interviews with HEAL and everything like that is helping to get the word out and letting people know that this does go on and that it's not right and they shouldn't be allowed to get away with it.
Yeah, like for sure, because, I mean, this might just be something that I do just make myself angry, but, you know, sometimes I do go on the Elevation's website. San Marcos has nothing on it. They have, like, no staff or whatever. There's no real reason for me to look at it, but with Island View, or, you know, as it's called now, Elevations, it's kind of cathartic, but I'm also able to, like, connect the dots on some stuff, too, and a lot of the staff that I was there with, especially Jeff LaValle, he moved from Island View to Solstice West, and then Wes Salent and Jenny Salent was a therapist, and Wes Salent was just a milieu staff. He was one of the people that PI forwarded me. They moved out to North Carolina, and Wes started his own program, and Jenny's now working at Solstice Teach. So, yeah, get pretty angry about that stuff too.
Yeah, well, that's common with this industry is they move around a lot. They trade staff, and it's part of the way they cover up abuse and keep people from being able to take action because, oh, well, that person's no longer at this facility.
Right, like, it sucks because several people, including me, we try to get our records from CRC who owned Aspen Education and blah, blah, blah. We're not able to get our records or anything, and, then we find out that staff are, basically moving to other states, and Island View changed its name to Elevations, and, it's just the same old pattern of nonsense, and, I have a pretty damn good feeling that since a lot of the staff from Island View are going to other places, it's just, another copycat.
Right, exactly.
Just rebranded in another place. And, family health and wellness, family health and wellness, I think that's what the new Aspen Education is called. It's all the same. It's the same people, same program. We've had some people from Elevations just basically said, it's the same program. Even in the handbook, it still says Island View in some places. I don't remember much about San Marcos, so I'm not able to, pinpoint who owns them and, connect all the dots with that place at all. But with Island View, it definitely has such a huge connection to Aspen Education and, what it's spawned off of.
Right. And then, of course, Mitt Romney founded Bain Capital, and Bain Capital owns CRC Health, a.k.a. Aspen, a.k.a. Island View.
Right. And, people have been trying for years and years and years to get regulations put in place in a lot of states. At least federal regulations would be 8+. But, the huge issue is that places like Montana and Utah don't have much regulation. You can try a lot of stuff. You can, people think that if these places are open, they're regulated.
Right, and that's a big misnomer. And even if they instituted federal regulations, those would only apply to places that receive federal funding or through Medicaid or Medicare. But it would not apply to a lot of the facilities, including the faith-based facilities, which is why it's really important that we get stuff done at the state level because it's outside the jurisdiction for the most part for federal regulations to apply, and the federal government can only ask states to implement their recommendations. States can opt out of implementing those regulations recommended at the federal level. So that's why we have to do the state level stuff so that we have the laws in the states matching what needs to happen for the protection of people in these settings.
Right, and I've tried to explain that to people, when you come to private and public, there's a huge difference, and then there's a difference between nonprofit and for-profit. Island View was a private for-profit, so, and people are like, oh, well, all places receive federal funding, blah, blah, blah. No, if you got people paying $10,000 a month, you don't need federal funding.
Right.
You don't need any of that. And people tend to assume that, the state's coming in every month and checking on the kids. No, I was there for almost 2 years. I didn't see anyone from the state. And even if there was somebody from the state, they got all the kids that were super brainwashed to probably be lurking around during that. But I don't know. I just know that I didn't see anyone. And, you can whistle blow all you want there. Any complaint that you write while inside Island View, it just goes to the same people that you have complaints with.
Right. So there's just no accountability for the program.
even if you tell your parents, it could be seen as manipulation.
Right.
And if, you know, that happened, they'd use it against you later. And it's just this vicious cycle. And, you know, when they mess with the parents especially, like my dad wasn't involved mainly because I didn't have any issues with them. It was my stepmother. With him, my stepmother was the biggest issue, and she just refused to be any part of my treatment because what was supposed to be treatment, because she blamed me for the entire thing. It was my responsibility when in reality a lot of it was not her. But with a lot of parents that I've heard stories about, they, you know, basically fell into the program jargon, and, you know, if you talk badly about the program, it's just seen as, you know, you're still manipulating, you're not being grateful for all the money that we spent on you, and, you know, you're wrong because, you know, they helped in this and that, and at least you graduated high school and blah, blah, blah. Like, I wasn't in that situation, but a lot of the people I know were and still are because they can't talk about the program to their own family that sent them there.
Right, and that's another way to prevent people from getting the support they need to actually report to the authorities or get justice for harms, like the person whose leg and foot was broken that you mentioned earlier, who didn't get proper medical care.
And even with her too, like she ended up, I think it was around the same time, or it was after that time, because she ended up cutting underneath her calf. She broke open a CD and cut herself pretty bad, like all over her body, and they should have taken her to the hospital, and they did not. Instead, they just punished her for it, like they did to anyone that was self-harming or was suicidal, along with they punish people for other things, and, you know, I can get into yellow zone if you want, but like, you just, with situations like that, it's even hard to talk about with therapists. It looks like it's not real. Like, you look crazy, and it sucks. Like, I feel like I look crazy when I talk about this to people because people seem to think that, again, if they're open, they are regulated.
Right, which just isn't the case, and Utah does a really poor job of regulating. That's where Island View is located, or Elevations now. They do a very poor job. I mean, I've helped families and individuals report to Utah, and usually we get a big runaround. You contact Child Protective Services, and they say that you need to contact the Joint Commission or the accreditation agency, that they go off what the accreditation agency says so that they don't really monitor it.
Pay them money.
Exactly. The accreditation, like to accredit some facilities, we were looking into that fairly recently. There was one accreditation agency where the most they charged any provider, any facility, was about $500,000 a year for accreditation, and they rely on self-reporting, self-assessment, and self-corrective plans. So they let the program say, well, here's where we're deficient, and then they say, well, we're going to take that on good faith that the program is reporting accurately that's where they're deficient and that's where they're going to make improvements, and they have an improvement plan in place. So It's basically rubber stamping what goes on with that, and for a very hefty fee in some cases. I mean, the lowest fee I think we saw was like $25,000 a year, and the highest one was about $500,000 a year. And so if you're paying an accreditation agency, I'm like, well, if HEAL decided to become an accreditation agency, which we will not because we don't believe in institutionalization, we think everyone should be part of their own communities and get the support they need at home and in their communities. But if you're looking at accrediting institutions, it's like, well, I think if I'm, getting a check for $500,000, I'm probably going to look pretty favorably and maybe overlook some things I shouldn't be overlooking because I want to keep getting that $500,000 annually.
Exactly.
So
a lot of these places have the same accreditation.
Yeah. And that's just for the therapeutic side, because a lot of the programs are not accredited for academic services, and even the ones that are, the accreditation bodies are very questionable. Like What is the one that is so common? I can't think of it.
Specific something. I know one has the word specific.
Yeah, there's a few, but it's advanced ed, advanced ED or advanced ed, and the people who run that, guess what? The people on the board of advanced ED are also directors at Aspen Education Group programs and other programs on the HEAL watch list. So they created their own accreditation body, basically, and they're giving themselves so-called accreditation to make it look like they are accredited academic programs, but they're not really accredited, in my opinion, and I don't think those are legitimate accreditation bodies if they're run by the same people who are running these facilities. They're not independent, but they make it look like they are. They make it sound like they are. I mean, most people aren't going into the accreditation agencies and looking at who runs it, who's on the board. Is that accreditation agency recognized by the Federal Department of Education as a legitimate accreditation body? Advanced ED is not, but people don't know that. So they say, oh, you're accredited by Advanced ED. Well, that looks legit. And there's been other accreditation agencies, too, that are just not legitimate accreditation agencies. And then there's these, I don't know, there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on with that. But a lot of it is just, more pay-to-play nonsense, where if you pay a fee, you get the accreditation stamp, and they rely on self-reporting and self-assessment, and then they just say, okay, well, you filled out all the right checks on this form, so we're going to give you the accreditation, and then that'll help you look more legitimate, even though the whole system is not legitimate, because there's no real oversight and no legitimate body actually verifying what's going on in most cases. Now, that's just one of the issues with the industry, but I've seen that with Aspen Education Group and Advanced ED, that it's Aspen or CRC Health directors who are on the board of Advanced ED, and they're accrediting Aspen Education Group programs, and
right.
it's more of the same. So.
And now Aspen Education is slowly getting rid of their programs, and Family Health and Wellness is, slowly absorbing these programs, because that's what happened with Island View.
Right, and that's bad press, and then all of a sudden a new thing props up with the same old people and with the same old facilities, but they're going to say, oh, we're different now because we're under new management, and then you're like, oh, you are? Because it looks like you came right out of Aspen, so how is that new management,
Speaking about that, it's really funny. I think the executive director, Jody Jocks, I think, she was the principal or the dean or whatever of the education program while I was there, and now she's the executive director. Jen Campellin was just a social science teacher, and now she's the principal. And, Chad Sanders, who was the U.S. history teacher while I was there, he was the one on the camping trip that took my level away from me. I don't think they split up their campus, apparently, and now they have, Viewpoint was the Aspen behavioral place, and then it's Discover 7 Stars or whatever, and now they're, making money off of kids with autism.
And that's one of the worst things you can do to a kid with autism. I've been trying to explain this to parents for years because I've studied, various issues with autism or Asperger's syndrome or spectrum disorder, whatever you want to call it. There's so many different things they call it. But it's really not a good idea. It's if you want to talk about culture shock or shocking the system, I mean, you're really shocking an autistic person. They need to have, especially severe autistic youth and children and people, need to have no big changes to their environment and any kind of even small change creates a really bad setback. So what you have is putting them in an environment with a bunch of other people they don't know. They're overstimulated horribly, which causes regression, and then they're being punished because they're regressing But if you understood autism, you would understand that by institutionalizing an autistic person, you're actually causing that type of regression, and that is what's causing it. I mean, the actual doing it. So anybody who says institutionalize your autistic child, or any child for that matter, but certainly when it comes to autistic children, institutionalizing them is the worst thing you could possibly do. For their ability to progress, because they need to feel a sense of continuity, they need a routine, they need the familiar environment, all of those things being stripped away. I mean, the better thing to do for an autistic person is to have a therapist or caregiver come into the home who can work with them in their normal environment.
And that's the way, like, I wrote my thesis actually on the long-term effects of residential treatment on children and adolescents. So a lot of the time it should be, if you're a kid in foster care, you need a family-like environment. It may not be your family, but it needs to be a family-like environment with, cases like, me and, autistic kids. It should be in the home, and providers should come in the home for that.
Exactly.
It's not a huge issue with that, though. With why we're not having that is because of access issues. Like, I'm up in a state where we do not have a lot of funding. It's very, very rural, and we don't have a lot of options. So something like that, at least in my community, isn't really an option. So people end up sending their kids out into the city, like in states where, that's not an option. We need to make it more of an option.
Right, and typically it is an option, but parents don't know how to ask for it or that it is an option. I mean, they're not going to they're not calling all the therapists in the phone book who might help on that issue and say, can you do a home visit? Can you work with me in my home because I have a child with autism? So people aren't asking the right questions to get the help they need. They don't look into what kind of help they need, and they just believe what they see and hear from these facilities and from other people saying, oh, well, you need help with autism. Well, guess what? Aspen Education Group treats autism. Well, no, they really don't. They don't. No. They treat everything the same way. I mean, you had mentioned that in our previous conversation, that no matter what issue someone is sent for, they're all getting the same, cookie-cutter approach, which is even worse. I mean,
speaking about that, there were a couple differences at Island View, and I will mention this because before I first got there, there used to be 6 teams. There was copper, silver, and gold, and those were the girl teams, and then orange, purple, and green were the boy teams. So before I got there, they dissolved copper and orange and split the people that were on those teams among the other teams. So when I got on silver team, that was the only team that did DBT. The only team in the entire facility that did DBT. And, a lot of us were diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. So in a lot of cases, yeah, it was very, very cookie cutter, but in that case in particular, it was, they basically clunked all of us together that had similar symptoms and all said that we had BPD and therefore we have to do DBT.
Right.
Yeah. So, everyone was held to the same rules and whatever, and, you can't do that to people because everyone's unique, everyone's different, everyone can't just, have the same treatment plan, and, you can't use, a point and level system because it doesn't teach good behavior. All it does is it teaches you how to hide your behavior, or it teaches you that, you're just going to get punished, and that's not how you help people,
Right, and I found a Yale study, a recent study from doctors at Yale University, which of course is Ivy League, saying that level systems don't work on children and youth, and that they actually are detrimental for progress when dealing with youth with behavioral issues. So it's really interesting that we have, an Ivy League study saying you shouldn't use level systems, yet we look at this entire industry, and it's all built on this idea of level systems.
And there's like a whole bunch of studies that I found while doing my thesis on that. Like, there's study after study after study saying that, token economy, which is what the point and level system is based off of, does not work.
Right.
It's all based off of B.F. Skinner's operational conditioning, and, it doesn't work. All it does is it teaches you the stuff I said, and that's it. And plus, it doesn't represent what's really going on in the real world. Like, we can all listen to music in the real world.
Right.
We can all play board games and cards. We can play video games if we wanted to go play video games. We can go outside if we want to go outside. All of it's given you is basic rights that you already had before you got there.
Right.
And, it starts off with day one with stripping you of your humanity. They strip you, too. Like, you're stripped down.
Yeah.
You're expected to spread your butt cheeks and cough and all that stuff like you do in prison. And then, they take away everything you can do.
Right, and they're doing that to kids. I mean, they treat kids like prisoners, or worse than prisoners, because in prison you can write letters without the prison reading your letters before they're sent out. You can make a call, unless you're in isolation. You can make a call, and the prison might monitor it, but they don't cut off your call, or they're not supposed to if you're saying whatever. You have access to your lawyer. You have access to the outside world. To the ACLU to file complaints. You have all that access. Religious freedom, you had mentioned that in the previous talk we had.
Yeah, that girl, there was a girl there, she was Wiccan or pagan. I can't exactly remember how she identified, but she definitely was not Christian, and she practiced witchcraft. And actually in the handbook it said that you cannot practice witchcraft here. So she was, she wasn't allowed to practice her own religion. And for a lot of people, religion is, it's a coping skill. I hate using that word, but it is a way to cope with how awful the world is. And, I talked to her, and she said that, even till this day, I can't get back into it. It's another way that they dehumanize you.
Right, that was the other thing I think we spoke about, too, was, were the staff at Island View mostly Mormon? Did they try to get you to be Mormon? I would said about my own experience at Provo Canyon that the kids, at least at that program, who were Mormon were treated better than the kids who were not Mormon, and that one of my contraband items that was sent home was my King James Bible. They wouldn't let me have my King James Bible. It was considered contraband, even though that was a secular, supposedly, treatment facility, and not a Mormon or faith-based treatment facility. Because of the staff and their beliefs, they decided arbitrarily, I suppose, that anything that wasn't Mormon was, contraband. You had mentioned something about caffeine and other things like that, too. I mean, I know you said that there was Mormons definitely working at the facility, but what was that about?
Yeah, so they're at Island View, and I'm talking most about Island View because San Marcos just mostly had college students and whatever.
As staff.
Yeah, it was bad stuff, but, I mean, it was Texas, and I can't assume that most people were Christian, but in Island View in particular, it was very, very, people said that they were Mormon. A lot of the art teacher and one of the staff, Cody, who, did pottery and whatever, he actually flipped a mattress on a girl while she was sleeping one time, but anyways, so they had, 8, 9 kids. If you cursed at Island View, they would take it as in, you did something awful, like how dare you. They were really, with me in particular, they were very, very homophobic. And a lot of it had to do with religious reasons because I later came out as trans, and I jokingly say this, and it's messed up, but they realized I was trans before I did, because they would implement, like, clothing and makeup assignments where I was forced to dress feminine. I was shamed in group for being gay. I confessed it to my therapist that I had a crush on a girl, and then he, in the middle of a therapy session, too, and then in group therapy, I think it was PSG, he actually just brought it up to shame me in front of the group. We weren't allowed to have caffeine. We had Sprite and we had root beer, but that was only on very, very special occasions. No coffee, not even decaf. If you had caffeine while on a leave of absence and they found out, you can get in a lot of trouble. I know there was a lot of Jewish kids there, but they didn't forbid them from practicing the religion. With the girl that practiced witchcraft, that was the only one that I remember. But they definitely had the way the program worked heavily tied into the religion.
Yeah.
And I think that at some point they did have a pastor that came in, but I don't really know because I don't go to church. So.
Right.
I was kicked out of church, so I just never went back.
Now, one of the things, I accept all people and as they are. I accept you as trans and whatever you identify as. But one of my concerns with homosexual youth is that in these programs, particularly the faith-based ones, but also any of them that target you for being homosexual or for being trans or LGBT,
or for
anything like that.
Identity issues, which is like the thing that they put on their website, which really means we treat people that are gay to make them not gay.
Exactly, yeah. Sexual identity issues. Yeah, that's one of the code words for using conversion therapy, what they call conversion therapy.
Or just identity issues.
Right.
Just identity issues. That can mean a whole lot of stuff, but in my case, it was about, my sexuality.
Right.
And how I express my gender, which is what they were targeting with the makeup and clothing assignments, which, was really detrimental to me. It made me feel dirty, and it made me feel very, very uncomfortable because I wasn't comfortable in my own skin doing this.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with me wearing jeans and a T-shirt.
Exactly. And that's been my concern, too, is that, kids that do identify as gay or lesbian being targeted, and then as they get older, deciding, that they would rather be the supposed opposite sex. If they're male, they'd rather be female instead of be a gay male. They'd rather be a female and be heterosexual. And my concern is that with these religious and other types of treatment facilities where they're targeting homosexuality, that they are actually making people feel so ashamed of their sexual orientation that makes them decide to be transgender and go through all of that. Now, that's not always the case. I know that there's real, and I trust your opinion on yourself and everything else, and I respect you and everything. I just, I'm concerned that with this targeting, that it's so detrimental. And so many people become suicidal because they can't be who they are and just live their life, and it's so sad. I'm heterosexual, but I am definitely, I have a lot of friends of all sorts, so I don't judge anybody, and I think you should just be who you are and be allowed to be who you are as long as you're not hurting anyone else. I draw the line if you're, I do not associate LGBT with weird deviant behavior like sexually exploiting children or anything like that.
Or you're a sexual predator.
Yeah.
See, I disagree with you about, because you're, you being targeted in the program because you're gay and that later makes you, trans. I see it as it makes a lot of internalized homophobia. You think that your sexuality is wrong.
Right.
And therefore you're wrong. And, a lot of people go in the closet and try to pretend that they're straight, and, because they feel dirty. And a lot of people end up committing suicide.
Yeah.
And, same thing can go with a lot of trans people, it didn't happen with me, but I can imagine if you're sent there because you're trans and they use conversion therapy on you, you can feel incredibly dirty about your body and how you are, and, it makes it even worse.
Yeah.
So I don't think it, how they're being homophobic and targeting the LGBTQ community as, I don't see that making people trans. I just see it as in, you create internalized homophobia, biphobia, transphobia. You create this internal hate within yourself, and that's what I see is way more detrimental.
Right. I agree. I think that's very detrimental to create self-hatred. I just think that self-hatred can turn into not wanting to be in the body you're in and wanting to change your physiology because of that.
Right, and in a lot of in some people's cases, was sexually assaulted or whatever. I can definitely see that happening. Making it you feel so incredibly raw in your body and disgusted that you feel like you have to change it to protect yourself. But
right.
I wouldn't say that that's everyone, because not every trans person, I'm not on hormones or anything, not every trans person wants to change their body, but, and not every trans person feels disgusted with their body, but with me in particular, because of how much they focused on how I presented myself, it made it even worse and made me feel wrong about my body, and it made it to where all I wanted to do was hide my body even more.
Right. Yeah, I wasn't making a blanket statement that that's why people become trans either. I was saying that I think for some people that might be the issue. My mother has a coworker who is transgender who regrets going through the surgery and the hormones and everything and wishes they hadn't. So,
that's okay. That's completely normal. I have friends I'm deep within the LGBTQ community, and I was the president of the Gender and Sexuality Alliance at my college, and that does happen within the trans community, and then you get people saying, well, are you really trans? You should have thought about those before you did it. Yeah, so, but yeah, no, I wasn't thinking that you're just making a blanket statement. I was just saying my point of view with it.
Okay, yeah, I think we agree. I just wanted to say I think we agree. I just wanted to make sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, let's see. I think that was all my questions that I have for you. I think I covered all the main issues. We went over restraint and solitary confinement, which was used at both facilities, and deceptive marketing and denial of contact with the outside world. And, were you denied clocks or calendars at any point, or were you, and that's one of the things that was at Provo Canyon on the punishment area. And even above that, we weren't really allowed to, there weren't clocks. I mean, there were clocks in the classrooms if you were privileged enough to go to class and you weren't on investment, but there were not clocks on the units, to my recollection. There weren't clocks. And some of the clocks were broken. They were always on the same time, so right twice a day. Some of them were covered up. In the investment unit, there's a clock, but it was covered by a piece of paper over the clock, so you couldn't see what time it is.
Right. Well, at Island View, I'm really glad they didn't do that to us. We were allowed to know what the date was and what time it was, but Trail Boss, who I mentioned, was the person that kept track of where everyone is and kept track of, got us on time to things. They controlled the time of the unit in a way to, when we lined up, when we went to places and stuff like that. But, we were at least privileged to know that time. At San Marcos, I didn't even see a clock. I didn't even see a calendar, nothing like that.
Wow. So San Marcos didn't have that, but Island View did. So, I mean, San Marcos did kind of restrict your knowledge of what day and time it was, but Island View didn't have that issue.
Right, like we were allowed to read the newspaper and stuff, so at least like we were allowed to keep up with, you know, the approved current events because they would take out pages of the newspaper and stuff. And, you know, like going kind of back to the homophobia stuff, with Island View, there was an incident when I was TL where two of my roommates actually were fucking around in the bathroom basically, and I don't know how they caught them, but they brought it up during day group, and that was, I think, either the same day or the day before after, or the day before the large group of girls ran, and we're basically expected to shame them for having, you know, normal human needs. And the staff turned to me and they were like, did you know about this? Like, because I'm gay, I obviously know if my roommates are fucking.
Well, and that's a normal side effect of being isolated and segregated from the rest of society. And you see that in the primate studies, the non-human primate studies. I think we talked about that last time we spoke. But they will masturbate or sexually act out because of the distress they're under in that environment, because it's such an unnatural situation to be separated from their family and their troop, because with non-human primates, it's all called troops. That's their community, is their troop. So if they're separated from their troops and they're isolated, they're going to sexually act out because that's a normal coping mechanism for primates, and humans are a part of the primate family. So sexual acting out when you're in a distressed situation is completely normal and natural, and to be punished for that and punished for everything else that goes on is screwy and shows that they lack understanding of basic psychology, really.
Right, and like, you know, I explained to them, listen, I'm on Seroquel, I pass out by 10 p.m., I'm done. And, like, kind of talking about the physical contact, we got in trouble if we touched each other. Like, we had to be, like, you know, 6 inches apart from each other. I remember not even 6 inches sometimes, even more. Like, I remember when we lined up, we had to stretch our arms out, and if we touched our neighbors with our fingertips, we were too close. And, you know, I will only speak about my situation with this where, you know, I go back and forth between craving touch, hardcore, or touch actually physically hurts me. And a lot of that, you know, I could tie into, you know, literally not being able to touch anyone.
Right.
Like, you know, we had to ask permission to give somebody a hug if they were sad even, and, you know, they would deny that.
Right, so they don't allow you to comfort each other even when it's just platonic.
Right, and, you know, like, there's nothing wrong with those girls having sex or whatever, but they definitely made it to where physical touch was seen as wrong.
And, you know, you're going back to the old studies in orphanages, you know, when babies were denied human touch as an experiment, they died. Because human contact is actually necessary for healthy survival, and when you are denied that, you can die in certain circumstances. We've seen those studies. So,
and we're like naturally social human beings, but like, and I literally made it to where I didn't want to be around people because people are always watching, and people could see everything I do, and if that happens, I can get in trouble for every little thing I can do. So it made me paranoid. It makes me, you know, not want to be around people because people are associated with, I'm going to get in trouble. So, you know, not only physical touch is an issue, but also being around people because it feels like people are, you know, going to judge you or they're watching your every move to see when you're going to mess up.
Right. And so you might agree that institutionalization in this sense can cause antisocial behavior or disorders, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I don't like being around people for long hours because, you know, it makes me anxious. And a lot of that I can tie to, being in Island View, because I was surrounded by, 24 to 30 people at all times, and, constant socialization and, constant micromanaging, not only by the staff but also by my own peers. It's exhausting being around people, and it's hard to trust people. You don't want to trust people because, you've put your trust in a group full of people that, you're trying to build bonds with, and you're trying to get help, or, you're expected to get help because your parents send you there for bullcrap reasons, and then it just makes it to where, people are bad.
Right, and then the other thing, too, Seroquel is an antipsychotic. You don't seem like a psychotic to me, and I'm sure you weren't psychotic at that time, but why are they putting people on antipsychotics? I know at Provo Canyon, we were talking about booty juice, the last one, if you talk back, all of a sudden you're tackled to the ground and they shoot you up with Haldol because you asked a question, It's like, well, how is that appropriate treatment when you're not dealing with a psychotic, when you're not dealing with someone with a psychotic disorder, and not dealing with someone who's even being physically aggressive or acting psychotic or anything where you feel like you need to do that just to manage the situation? But those can cause serious long-term effects,
right,
whether it's Thorazine, Haldol, or Seroquel, and it's not something people should be doing. But then they punish you, and you were talking about that girl who had the sleeping issue where she was just tired all the time. It's like, well, you're putting people on medications that can cause narcolepsy, that can cause sleep disorders, that can cause everything under the sun. And then you're punishing them probably for having a normal side effect to the medication you're actually giving them. It's absurd.
Right. A lot of people were on the same medications that Island View. A large amount of us, at least people I've talked to after Island View, people that were around there the time I was, and I was there in a really screwy time at Island View where there's a lot of transitions, and I honestly think they were prepping to, become elevations at that point. But a lot of us were on Abilify, a lot of us were on Trazodone, a lot of us were on Prozac. A lot of people were diagnosed as having bipolar disorder, where, some people could legitimately have bipolar disorder. With me, it turns out, I finally just got diagnosed as having ADHD when, I was misdiagnosed as having bipolar disorder because how my ADHD presented itself looked like a manic episode all the time. So I feel like, at least in, and I'm on stimulants now, and I'm doing really well. I'm doing fine. I'm stable. I'm not having, gigantic mood swings. I'm not having huge plummets. I'm on a good regimen. But when I was, anytime I was on antipsychotics, because I've been on a whole bunch, I just gained weight. It made my depression really bad. And for some reason, I think, a lot of the time they prescribe antipsychotics to teenagers that are seen as troubled, quote-unquote, because it's a controlling thing. You give somebody an antipsychotic, you're going to be really chilled out. You're going to want to sleep all the time. You're just going to want to eat, if even that, and sleep. And, for staff, that's easy to handle. I feel like they did stuff like that just to make it easier for the staff and not to actually help us.
Right. So it's kind of a chemical restraint situation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. When I was in group homes and stuff as an adult, because after Island View I ended up becoming a ward of the state. I ended up moving to after Island View. And it was way worse with the antipsychotics there for me, but I think it was legitimately just to, keep us sedated and keep us easily controllable and to keep us confused.
Right.
And to make us much more suggestible. I think that's the right word.
Yeah, definitely. And with do you recall any sleep deprivation? I know at Provo Canyon there was definitely sleep deprivation as far as what they would call bed checks. They would come and flash a light in your face to see if you're sleeping and shake you and try to disturb you. And if you did get disturbed and react normally, as anyone would, to being shaken or having a light shined in your face, then you would be punished because you weren't sleeping. So you were not doing what you were expected to be doing, even if somebody's actively trying to wake you up.
I mean, Island View, they did do the bed checks and whatever, but it wasn't to the extreme of, like, you know, messing with you while you're physically in bed, like shaking you or whatever, but they would definitely shine the lights on you. But if you were in yellow zone, which I can explain, I should explain yellow zone. If you were in yellow zone or you were on suicide watch, you were expected to move your bed out in the hall, and they always moved your bed out in the hall right underneath the safety light. So not only do you have staff walking by every 15 minutes, but you have a safety light going right above you. And, you know, like, we wouldn't be sleep deprived in the middle of the night unless it was, like, those circumstances, but because we were, like, a lot of us were on antipsychotics, you want to take a nap during the day, and we weren't allowed to. And, you know, like the girl that got dragged out of bed by her ankle, like, you know, you're just trying to sleep, man. You know, there's no reason to drag somebody out of bed.
Right. She was posing no threat to anyone else. She was. No, I mean,
she was just sleeping, and, you know, like, we were cleaning, and it was kind of a pain in the ass because, you know, if somebody didn't clean, they had the tendency to, like, mess with everyone and to, you know, blame everyone for this one person not cleaning. And, you know, like, that would have been an inconvenience, but this definitely does not deserve being dragged out of bed. Yeah. Do you want me to go into yellow zone? Because I keep on mentioning that, but I always forget it.
Yeah.
Go into it. So, yellow zone, I think WASP programs call them, like, Cat 5 or whatever, or isolation. You know, there's a lot of different terms for it. So, at Island View, there were certain things that you can get on yellow zone for. So, one would be, you know, running away or having run plans, which they would make everything into a run plan. Like, if you know, were passing notes or whatever, they would assume that you were planning on running. You know, if you self-harmed, if you became violent with staff, sometimes they would just put people on yellow zone for, you know, the sexually acting out and stuff and whatever. So basically yellow zone was, you know, you had 18 to 72 hours, and you had to drag your chair out in the hall, and you had to sit there out in the hall, complete silence, be doing therapy assignments, which basically was just, you know, an admission statement saying, you know, I did this wrong and, you know, blah, blah, blah. I never had to fill that out because I was way too afraid to get in that much trouble there because of my 6-month incident where I kind of freaked out. But I saw plenty of people get put on this, and they weren't allowed to leave the unit. They got crappy takeaway food, which a lot of the time was PB&J, or it was, like, cold by the time it got there. And, you know, then you had to go in front of a committee, and the committee would be made up of your peers. So because I was a team leader and a test at one point, I had to sit on this committee, and you actually had to approve or deny somebody to get off the yellow zone. So here I was listening to, you know, an example, a kid was caught pissing in his roommate's shampoo bottle. Funny. Really funny. That's funny. I'm sorry, that's really funny. But I was expected to determine this kid's future.
Right.
That's a lot of weight to put on a 15, 16-year-old. You know, you're expected to, you know, you literally have somebody's life in your hands. And yellow zone was, you know, wasn't the worst thing. There was individual focus where, you know, I mentioned the girl that was on communication restriction. Essentially the same thing. What they did to her was take all the personal effects, but you had to sit at your desk and do therapy assignments. You weren't allowed to go to school. You just had to sit there and do the assignments. You had to be in complete silence. You had to drop slips out in the hall to go to the bathroom or get your food or whatever. Like, and this girl, I think she was on it for like 6 months. So those were the two big main punishments. TF was team focus, which was the same thing as IF, just the entire team. So, yeah, those are the big main punishments at Island View.
Was there anything else you want to add?
No, that's pretty much about it. I know I've kind of rambled a bit, but...
So what would you tell parents who are considering San Marcos or Island View / Elevations?
Don't send your kids there at all. Please don't. Island View looks really nice. It is not. San Marcos, you don't receive any therapy there, and they group a whole bunch of kids that definitely should not be grouped together. Like, you should not group a bunch of violent kids together with people that have intellectual disabilities that aren't violent. Just for example. So, yeah, don't put your kids in any of those places. Yeah, basically just don't. Please.
Well, I definitely concur with that. Do not put your kids in any of these places, and get help locally and in your community. And realize the teen years have always been an issue for people. You can look at Romeo and Juliet. You can go back and look at anything you want to look at. You can look at Rebel Without a Cause with James Dean, or East of Eden, or you can look at history. You can remember your own teen years if you can recall that far ago. And remember that, it's a time of transition. It's a time where people make mistakes and might use poor judgment sometimes. But you need to look at if somebody's acting out, if they're self-medicating in any way. You need to start looking at what might be the cause, trauma, exactly, and deal with it from that perspective and try to find out what's actually going on. I think a lot of people engage in beneficent neglect, and they kind of ignore their children until their children become a problem for them, and then they're dealing with a stranger in their house, and a lot of that's on the parents because they allowed their child to become a stranger in the house. Because they haven't been paying attention, and they haven't made an effort to build that relationship. And instead of saying, well, we need to fix this, and I need to work on building a stronger relationship with my family and with my children, they say, well, this is a problem. I'm just going to try to find a solution that doesn't involve me investing my time. And I think if parents spend a little more time with their kids, and they would end up saving themselves a lot of money and heartache, and their children too, instead of sending them off to programs.
Right. Like, my entire college fund that my dad was saving out for years and years was entirely depleted by this place. And, kids don't act out for no reason. Like, with my case, I was being severely abused by my stepmother. So, it's not just, the troubled teen years for some people. For some people, it's, they're reacting to the situation that they're in. And, if it's an abusive situation, that stuff definitely needs to change on all sides.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons parents often don't seek local and community-based help, because they don't want their faults to be named as they don't want to have to make any changes. They'd rather say that the kid's the problem and not have to face the fact that maybe something they're doing or not doing has caused the problem, or maybe it's neglect or abuse or their lack of attention or anything like that that could be resulting in these behaviors. They don't want to examine that and take the right action to self-correct their own errors, and they just want to be able to say the kid's the black sheep of the family, or they're the problem, and so they have
that
to.
Was me. Yeah. I definitely needed help, but I did not get the help that I needed at Island View. And, what I really needed and what Island View really does, and what sending your kid honestly really does, is just separates them from the family and takes them out of the equation. And when they come back, if they do come back, they're a complete stranger. So, if you really want your kid to, get the help that they need, if you really want, stuff to get better for their family situation, the entire family needs to be involved as a whole, and not just, the random phone calls for family therapy. Everyone, it's a family unit issue. It's not just a one-person issue.
Right, and that's the problem with these programs, too, is because they encourage the scapegoating of the youth, and they don't hold the parents accountable, and they don't try, and they don't even, they just go along with the storyline. Yep, the kid's the problem, send them here,
Right.
instead of saying, you know what, usually when a kid's acting out, the problem is, you know, has to do with their environment, has to do with, you know, there's a problem in the home or a problem at school,
Right.
bullying, whatever. I mean, and these are all things that have to be looked at. And a lot of times parents don't think about what alternatives there are. I'm like, if your child is being bullied at school and they're in high school and they're high school age and they're being bullied, even if it's junior high or elementary school, you know, you can find another elementary school. You can homeschool. You can find a different school. You can take action to get them out of that environment if it's, you know, hostile. I also recommend, you know, if somebody's being bullied, maybe sign them up for martial arts training so they can get the confidence and the self-control and the self-discipline as well as self-defense techniques if they are being bullied or attacked and physically harmed, that they can protect themselves. And that's a less expensive alternative. It'll help them learn self-discipline. It'll help them learn focus. It'll help them learn how to defend themselves if they're being attacked. And I would say that's going to be a much more positive experience if you're dealing with a kid who's being bullied than if you send them away to a program, because, I mean, I know I've had parents call me and say, well, I have to put my kid in a therapeutic program because they've been so bullied at their normal school. And as you discussed tonight, they bully the kids in the programs horribly in these group sessions. They're nothing but bullies and bullied constantly 24 hours a day. And I'm like, well, what you're going to do is take your kid from an environment where they might be miserable a couple hours a day at school, which is horrible, but coming home where they feel safe in their room or in their home and with their family. And instead of saying, okay, well, you're not going to get any respite from bullying. Since bullying's your issue and you don't like being bullied, I'm going to send you to a place and they're probably going to bully you 24 hours a day because, you know, and that's the solution to stopping the bullying. No, it's not. So that's...
And another thing, like you mentioned how parents, you know, the program doesn't hold them accountable. I hate that word, but they, you know, they just say that, you know, the kid's the issue and blah blah blah. I remember at Island View in particular, they would blame some of the parents for the kid's issue.
Right.
But towards parents that really didn't have anything to do with it, like, let's say, you know, they were blaming the kid's birth mom for it, even though the birth mom had, like, nothing to do with the situation. You know, there were times where they said, you know, you're just being a helicopter parent, blah, blah, blah. You know, like they mess with the parents too, and sometimes, you know, they don't put the blame on the parents where it should be, and then they put the blame in inappropriate places, or they, you know, in my case with my birth mom, they try to completely separate my relationship with her because she was an awful person. Given she is an awful person, but they did it in a way to where it was wrong. So yeah, no, don't send your kids there. They'll make you think. You know, it's not going to involve the family in a lot of cases, and if it does, it's just going to, you know, mess with the parents, and, you know, it's going to
exactly, because what they mean by holding the parents accountable is, oh, you're falling for your kid's manipulation, you're falling, you know, did they complain to you? You're questioning the program in our milieu, you're questioning our tactics, you know, they'll attack the parents for questioning the way their children are being treated. It's not that they'll say, okay, well, let's take a look and examine what was going on in the home, what led to this situation, what led to the decision to enroll, because it's a serious change to put your child in an institutional setting. So what led to this? They're not going through what would be an intelligent and normal, what a psychologist might do, or even a licensed counselor who was legitimate might do, which is, how did we end up here? What's the situation? How can we address these problems and make sure that when everybody is reunited that these problems, you know, are continuing to be addressed with the whole family, but they just look at behavior, solely behavior, and when you look solely at behavior instead of the dynamics that have resulted in acting out, and you're like, well, I'm not going to worry about whether or not you were being beaten or abused or verbally attacked in your home. That's not of interest to me. What's of interest to me is how you behave, and that's what's of interest to your parents is how you behave. So it has nothing to do with how you're being treated, even though everybody who knows psychology at all knows that if you torture someone and abuse someone and batter someone and bully someone, that they are going to have a reaction to that, and it's unreasonable and unnatural to expect them to not react to that in a negative way. So you have to change that dynamic, and if you're not acknowledging that that's a problem, then you're not actually fixing what's going on and what the issues are.
Right, and that's exactly what happened to me because, like how I got sent to San Marcos is, I had a really bad dissociative episode and ended up pulling a knife on her. 12-year-olds don't pull out knives on people for no reason and don't completely, trash the downstairs of their house. So, that's something obviously wrong, but when you put the blame entirely on the kid, it's just it's a vicious cycle like all of this is, and yeah, none of it helps anyone. And if you're really looking to, help your kids or, figure out what's going on, at least it needs to be done locally, or, find other resources. Don't resort to sending your kids away. Hell, if you're worried about, how your kid's doing in school, that they're being bullied and that, they're having emotional issues, there's day schools that have staff there to train, that are trained to deal with that stuff. You don't need to resort to sending your kid to, Utah.
Exactly.
So, that's pretty much what I want to say.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and I will just thank you for doing the